welcome back everybody. Hope you enjoyed that video and hope you get a chance to go over and check out the museum live and in person. You're here, it's here, make the connection. So next up, we're thrilled to have Mark Groden here from Skyryse One. He's the CEO of Skyryse One. If you get an opportunity to go to their booth, after you hear everything we're going to talk about, you're going to want to go and see it. So walk towards the hangar, real close to our flying display too. So go over there and maybe check out a bundled subscription for all the great, wonderful flying aviation products. So Mark, you've taken something that's really complicated to fly, a Robinson helicopter, and you've simplified it. You've taken all the controls out and put in 2 touchscreen videos and 1 controller in the center. How is that possible?
Yeah, it seems kind of surreal, doesn't it? Yeah, well, what you actually see inside the cockpit really is just the tip of the iceberg. So we do have just 2 touch screens and 1 control stick inside the cockpit, but behind all of that is a full fly-by-wire architecture and a full fly-by-wire system, which, as many of you know, right, is what's in a commercial airliner. So if you get into a Boeing or an Airbus or a military jet like an F-35, you'll find a big avionics bay, and inside of that, all these boxes that communicate with actuators, and then those boxes communicate with the cockpit and ultimately the pilot. So when I started the company about 8 years ago, the mission of the company is all about making it easier and safer to fly general aviation airplanes and helicopters. And in order to get the opportunity to completely redefine how easy and safe it is to fly these aircraft, what we recognized we first had to do was bring that fly-by-wire technology to general aviation for the first time. And on the back of that, we got the opportunity to redefine what the cockpit looks like, which now, of course, looks so simple. It's just 1 control stick and 2 touchscreens. But actually, the bulk of the work, really, you can't even see. It's invisible to you as the pilot. So inside that Robinson helicopter, which of course is a light utility helicopter, single engine turbine, we actually have all the components that you would normally find in a much bigger counterpart aircraft. The flight control computers, the motor controllers, and then all of the redundancy that you would expect, and then of course the actuation mounted right up at the swash plate in this case, or at a flight control surface in the case of the airplane. And so because of that triple redundancy architecture behind the scenes, we get the opportunity to completely redefine what that cockpit looks like for the first time.
Yeah, not what the cockpit looks like, but the whole thing. I mean, when you look in the bubble of the R66 over there, you don't see anything. There's no rudder pedals, there's no panel. It's just amazing. And I'm curious why the R66. So I've got a little bit of time in R22s, and I described that to your team yesterday as trying to balance a watermelon on a ballpoint pen, right? So trying to hover in R22 is, it takes some time, right? So why did you pick the R66? Did you want to start with the hardest thing first?
Yeah, you got it. We want to start with the hardest thing first that had the biggest opportunity if we could solve the problem.
Okay.
So the objective of the company is obviously all general aviation airplanes and helicopters. And recognizing that right now in the United States there's about 500,000 active airplane pilots, and there's about 20,000 active helicopter pilots.
Really?
Yeah, so very, very few, and a small fraction of the airplane pilots are helicopter pilots. And I think the reason for that is because most airplane pilots, like you said, you know how to fly an airplane, you know how to aviate, navigate, communicate, and then you hop into an R-22 or another helicopter.
Everything's different.
Everything's different, right? It's not exactly a confidence-building experience, right? You get into that aircraft and you're like, oh, wow, I can't even hover this thing, and that's supposed to just be, the first step. So if it's that difficult to learn how to hover an aircraft, well, of course, you still have all that additional work that's on your lap as a pilot, so how are you going to do it? And what we recognized was if you could take a helicopter and make the aviate part, more or less very, very straightforward, very easy for, an airplane pilot to go into, or even somebody who's not a pilot at all, the opportunity would be tremendous, because I think most people actually would love to fly a helicopter. You talk to an airplane pilot and you really get them talking. Most people say, well, it would be pretty magical to take off and land vertically, of course, right? That's the dream for a lot of us. Literally, we have had that dream, in some form or another. Yeah, right, we're levitating or in an Iron Man suit, right? Like that's literally, through the course of Skyryse, the last 8 years since I founded the company, I hear that from countless people. And the helicopter gives you that. But it's also very difficult to fly, and the safety record, as a result of that complexity, is what it is. So we recognize that if we can make it easy to fly the helicopter from an aviate perspective, and then bring all the skill of the navigate and communicate, well, then you could have a really compelling opportunity. And you look around Oshkosh right now where we're sitting, most of the show are airplanes. There's almost no helicopters here to speak of, because almost everybody here is flying an airplane, but very few people here know how to fly a helicopter for that very reason. As a helicopter pilot myself, I had the same experience early on. It takes 10, 20 hours to safely hover that aircraft. It's really difficult. And as you probably experienced when you flew Skyryse 1, right? Just slide your finger up and boom, you're in a hover. And we get people doing that in literally 5 minutes. So as compared to what it is today, you get in a helicopter and it's very humbling, it's not confidence inspiring, and you feel like you're gonna have a lot of workload on your plate the whole time. You get into our aircraft and you're immediately in a hover and you're holding that hover until you tell it to do otherwise. I mean, that's just a very different way of experiencing the joys of flight, and particularly vertical flight.
Yeah. Ain't technology grand?
Ain't technology grand. So here we are at Oshkosh. How has the response been? What has it been like as people are learning about your product, here on the grounds, and obviously more days to come, but what's the initial feedback been like here this year?
It's been fantastic. So many people come up to our booth and they see the aircraft and they have some form of, wow, I can't believe this is real. This is surreal. It's not really all that's in the cockpit. All the pedals, as you pointed out, and everything's gone. And folks get really excited because I think a lot of people in this industry, they recognize that this is the future. When you look at airplanes and helicopters today and you look in those cockpits, imagine 100 years from now, what are our grandchildren going to be flying? I sure hope it doesn't look like what we're flying right now, right? Because that certainly doesn't look like any other experience in our lives, right? You get in a modern car, it doesn't look that way. Your personal computer, your iPhone, whatever device we engage with on a daily basis, nothing looks like general aviation as it stands right now. So when you think about the future, I think most people see the future as exactly what we have, 200 yards sitting over there in our aircraft. And they see it and their eyes go big and they're like, oh my God, this is real. Yep, it's real. Do you want to try it? And they're just overjoyed. So it's been fantastic. And we've been building towards this as a team for about 8 years. So this is our first time here. We're really excited to be bringing the aircraft and getting the reception that we're getting.
That's great.
It's really disruptive, and I want to kind of tug on that string a little bit. So it's impressive when you look in there. It almost looks like a mock-up because there's so little to look at other than the two screens in the interior. And I can imagine that younger generations, new helicopter pilots are going to get into that, and it's super intuitive. What do old school helicopter pilots think about that? Because here's the parallel I want to draw is when I was at Cirrus, we had this beautiful composite modern aircraft, glass cockpits, and it had a parachute. And some of the old school pilots will say, airplanes don't need parachutes. But over time, it's been widely adopted as a life-saving measure, which really, it's in there. You don't have to use it if you can feel like you can fly the plane, but it's there for everybody. And even if the pilot gets incapacitated, it's a life-saving solution. So we've had to overcome some of the naysayers early on, the old school aviators. What do old school helicopter guys think about what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, everybody has slightly different specific muscle memory from whatever aircraft they've flown. And what I would say is most pilots recognize that they don't want to be spending 100% of their time focused on the low-level attitude control of cyclic, collective, and pedals, which, by the way, doesn't give you any additional extremity to do anything with.
Right, like tune the radio.
Yeah, like tune the radio. So if you read the pilot's operating handbook, even for the Robinson helicopters, it says, in the event of engine loss, try and restart the engine while in auto rotation. Well, you laugh because it's happened exactly 0 times a day.
Right. It's not possible.
Who's been in an auto rotation and tried to restart the engine? It's never happened. You're just hoping you safely stay inside that newly defined flight envelope in that auto rotation. And when you look at the best pilots in the world, they're flying airplanes like the F-35. And a lot of people that get into our aircraft, they say, wow, this reminds us, those who have had that experience, says, this reminds us of the F-35. And the point there is, if you really want to be leveraging the skills of piloting, you want to be focused on that higher level decision making, the navigation and the communication. And so even good helicopter pilots, what they really start to key in on is, do I have the agency that I used to have when I had full control, in every extremity being used? And the answer is 100% yes. But that's been the 8 years of development. And as a helicopter pilot myself, that's really important to me. You recognize that you don't want to be taking the agency away from the pilot. In fact, it's the absolute opposite. We want to give them 100% of the capability of the aircraft at their fingertips or out on the control stick, 100% of the time, but with a safety envelope. So they can't go outside of what that envelope is, regardless of the state of the aircraft. So let's say you have engine power and everything's working great. Well, great, that's one envelope. But if the engine's not working, obviously you can't climb, you can't hold altitude, so therefore you have a different envelope, and the aircraft knows that.
Yeah. So again, kind of the parallel with the Skyryse is they've got the parachute, but you don't have to use it, right? The pilot can always be in control. And I noticed the same thing over there. You can auto-rotate automatically and fly down and land in that envelope, but you've left that decision in the hands of the pilot, right? If somebody wants to try and hand fly it and auto-rotate manually, they can do that, right?
That's right. So, and this is actually where a lot of our design and engineering went, was we want to retain the agency with the pilot to be able to say, where's your LZ? Where are you going to set this aircraft down? And oh, by the way, what is that set down going to look like? Because not all auto rotations are the same. Sometimes you want to auto rotate and take out all your forward airspeed and do a vertical set down. Other times, let's say you have a tail rotor failure, you actually want to do what's called a run-on landing. So that agency is retained, but the difference here is you're basically choosing your LZ, and then you're choosing what your flare looks like, as compared to monkeying with the cyclic, the collective, and the pedals, all of which are coupled, and you're just trying to get each one of these maneuvers to work. Here, as you probably experienced, the stick just gives you exactly what you're commanding, decoupling all of those different axes.
And always giving the pilot options is important, because it wonderfully auto-rotates down to a safe landing, but at the last minute you might realize that where you're set up to land, like one of your team explained to me, is, all right, it's a beautiful field, but it's a soccer team. So what do you have to do at the last minute? You don't want to land there, so the pilot's got to make a decision, right? So you can always overcome the computer and do what the pilot thinks is the best decision.
Exactly, right? Exactly, yeah.
What's the single most important thing you want people to know about Skyryse One? Well, let me ask you another question about that, because we've been talking a lot about helicopters, and like you said, that's a small percent of the population that's here. How do you apply this operating system to fixed-wing aircraft?
Yeah, so we've actually already started applying it to airplanes, and most of our backlog are airplanes, in fact. Okay. So we're working on a number of different models, and again, part of the reason why we started with the helicopter was because we recognize that from a technology perspective, it's far harder to apply this technology to a helicopter. Yeah. And you point out a Robinson R66, right? We could have started with a twin-engine helicopter, with lots of useful power, volume. Everything is easier, and oh, by the way, more stable. Instead, we chose to go light utility helicopter Robinson R66, where everything's more constrained and more difficult. And oh, by the way, as you say, you're balancing on
watermelon on a ballpoint pen.
It's not easy. So, the actuation, all the flight control, everything's harder. So, so then when you take that same technology, the actuators, the flight control computers, and then the cockpit user interface, and you bring that to the airplane, everything is easier to take into it. The value propositions are quite similar. You point out the parachute. The parachute, I spent a lot of time better understanding this. And most of the time when people pull the parachute, it's because they don't understand what the state of the aircraft is. It's a misunderstanding between the pilot and an autopilot or something else, and I don't blame folks. There's no English in that autopilot head today. It took me about an hour to learn what all those abbreviations mean. It's like, I still am not sure, how many layers of automation I put on or taken off. And oh, by the way, as a pilot right now, I'm 100% the backup, for if that autopilot were to do something wrong and achieve some unsafe attitude, for which there are plenty of accidents and parachute pulls. So the difference here is the fly-by-wire system is 10 to the minus 9th. That cannot be said for anything else in general aviation today. And because of that, there is no degraded state, right? Like an autopilot is a single-thread system. And when that lets go, the pilot is the backup. Okay. That is not true for SkyOS and our fly-by-wire architecture. The same as you would find in an Airbus or a Boeing, right? The fly-by-wire system must always work, necessarily. So because of that, you end up with an aircraft that has a much higher level of reliability inherently in the flight controls. And then when you simplify what that cockpit looks like in the user interface, you can expect it to always function on behalf of and in conjunction with the pilot.
In our last 30 seconds, let me ask you one quick question. Somebody in your camp tipped me off. Tell me the significance of the N number on the aircraft you've got on display over there.
So the origin story of the company, when I was a little kid, I grew up actually not far from here in Metro Detroit, and my family was always about a 5-hour car ride away from me. And so I was 10 years old, rolling around in the backseat of the car trying to get to see my grandfather, who was the closest person in the world to me. And I didn't see him that Thanksgiving because it was such a long drive and it just didn't make any sense. So he sent me a Popular Mechanics magazine from 1957, and on the cover of this Popular Mechanics magazine is a picture of a flying saucer. And you open it up, and it's this big, story about, oh, the future in 5 years in 1962,
Right.
we're all going to be flying around in flying saucers from our backyard. And believe it or not, most of the articles actually focused on the user experience, how easy it is to engage with this aircraft and go for that flight. And because of plastics, that was the whole point, because of plastics, we're all going to be flying these machines. So here I am, 10-year-old kid. You know, I get this article, I'm like, 1962, it's 2000, whatever. This didn't happen. And when I was finishing my PhD, this was 8 years ago, my grandfather died the day before I finished my PhD, and I was deciding what I wanted to do with my life. And basically, I've dedicated my life to that mission and delivering that.
Wow. That's
Congratulations. Why don't you tell the
Thanks
good
for sharing
people
that.
at Oshkosh Live where to find out about Skyryse, to learn more about what you got going on?
Yeah, thank you. Skyryse.com if you want to see more about our product, and we're about 500 yards that way on the other side of the FAA Safety Center if you want to experience the simulator.
Wonderful.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
so
coming
much,
by,
Mark. Appreciate
Stay
your
close.
time.
All right, we've got